If you would like a visual, I'm 13 years old. I have a very 80s perm and braces. Alright, so I just got home from school, and we're gonna head down a path into the woods behind my house. This is in Maryland, but the woods are very similar to the woods here. I go into these woods all the time. I'm very familiar with them. So I'm heading, before I even get to the path into the opening of the woods, I already know exactly what the sand and the gravel is going to feel like crunching under my feet. And I know that as I get further into the forest, that gravel crunch is going to give way to like that soft, sweet smelling cushion of broken pine needles under my feet. It's a beautiful sunny day like today, and there are beams of light, like filmy columns of light with dust swirling coming in through the branches, and it's a gorgeous day. And as I walk down the path, I'm dragging my finger along the trunks of the trees and greeting them, because I know these trees by name. And I don't mean birch, maple, and oak, I mean by the names I've given them, because these trees and I grew up together. I know them as the elevator tree, the shipwreck tree, and the vine tree, which is the best of all of the trees. So these are my trees, and you all are now in my forest with me. Now this particular day that you're walking with me, I'm crying, because remember, I'm 13. And a group of girls, those girls whose houses I slept over, my best friends, my soccer teammates, have decided, tragically, that I am no longer cool. So I find myself on the outside of my friend group, and it's really painful. So I do what I always do. I'm heading into the woods towards a creek bank to a particular tree, the vine tree, because I know I'm going to feel a little bit better. So this particular tree, the vine tree, it has a big, like a knotty, ropey vine that hangs down in this U-shaped loop. And it is the perfect height for a swing. So I go back there all the time. I go back there to read. I have read so many Judy Blume books sitting on that vine. I read Lord of the Rings, Little Women, and perhaps some scandalous books like the V.C. Andrews, Flowers in the Attic, for any children of the 70s and 80s might remember those books. But it's my safe place. Sometimes I just go there to think. I just go there to sit on that vine. And some days like this day, today, I go there to cry, because I know that place is safe. I sit on that vine and I kick back on my heels and I will swing out over the creek bank, and when the wind goes through my hair and the sun comes down on my face, I know I'm going to feel a little bit better, even on the worst days. So today, as you and I are walking towards the creek, towards this tree, I get to the opening right before the tree, and I stop. And instead of seeing my vine swing, I see 2 lengths of vine hanging down, because someone came through and sliced through my vine with an axe. In that moment, it felt like all the joy and the comfort and the magic just got sucked right out of the world. And I remember crumpling on my knees on that muddy creek bank and just sobbing. Within weeks, crews came in, they cut the trees down, and they cut down the vine tree, and houses rose up. And I just, as a 13-year-old, just sat there and watched, and what could I do? I was 13, right? So losing that forest left a really big imprint on me. It's a wound that I've carried with me my whole life. I alluded to that a little bit on the panel. So we're gonna leave this very heartbroken 13-year-old version of me over here. We're gonna come back for her, and she's gonna be fine, I promise. So you can all get out of the time machine, and we're back in Tamworth in 2026. That incident had as I said, left a big imprint on me. If I were a superhero, are there any superhero fans like Marvel Comics or the Spider-Man movies? I'm a big superhero fan. If I were a superhero, which I'm not, at least not that I know of yet, I'm still, hopeful. If I were a superhero, that's my origin story. That's my before and after moment. That is the thing that shaped who I became and how I view the world, was that losing that forest. So I went on to become a journalist. Then I became a farmer. I am now a professor. I teach in a creative writing MFA program at Drexel University, and I am a novelist. These are all jobs that are rooted in some way in my love of nature, and somehow in how I teach, how I work in the farm that I ran. I think that we think of climate solutions. We think of the engineers. We think of the scientists. We think of these entrepreneurs starting companies to put solar panels on our roof. But I think that frame is too narrow, I think we can go back and look and broaden the scope of where these climate solutions come from. I think that we can look to the because I think climate solutions are also coming out of our culture, not just out of science labs. I think we can look to the musicians, we can look to the playwrights, the fiction writers, the poets, the video game designers are doing some really creative work in engaging climate science in their stories. And so I think we can bring all of these people into how we think about where we might find climate solutions. So I would argue with you that these storytellers and all these different genres and varieties are the research and development department for humanity. They're testing ideas before they come out into the real world. So, I said I went on to become, a journalist, and I was exploring the world through being a farmer and a journalist and a professor. And I think that this, to me, all merged together on my science background when I went back to school for sustainable agriculture, my literature background, my work as a professor. It all came together in my stories when I found a place to communicate science through storytelling. And I think that is a real opportunity. Because lots of people are going to show up for a documentary or read a 10,000 word article in the New York Times, but there's a lot of people who don't want to do that. They would read a good story. They'd read a good mystery, some suspense, or maybe a romance, or whatever kind of books you like. So it makes me wonder, so what if some of the solutions for surviving and thriving in our changing climate already exist? And they exist in the novels and the movies and the stories that we consume as entertainment. So if you're not with me yet, if you're thinking, I don't know about novels saving the world. Okay, let's go back a little bit to Jules Verne. If you've ever heard of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea? In 1864, Jules Verne wrote 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and he imagined a submarine, a self-sustaining submarine, decades before one existed in the world. And writers like Jules Verne had this long history of imagining futures, of technology, of ideas that just don't exist in the real world yet, and imagining them before they did, and then we catch up, right? So, maybe we should be looking deeper at some of these ideas. Remember Star Trek? The tractor beam, that beam of light that would grab objects in space and pull them in? All right, well, that was actually not invented by Star Trek, that idea. There was an author, E.E. Smith, who in 1931, I'm pretty sure I'm right about that, 1931-ish, wrote a novel called The Space Hounds of IPC. It was not a huge novel, but he wrote the tractor beam. And now, in 2026, almost 100 years later, scientists are actually working on developing a tractor beam. 100 years later, after this guy dreamed it up. Okay, it's not exactly, they're not starting with a giant ship in space, they're starting with small subatomic particles, but they are working to develop an actual tractor beam. So, it makes me wonder, if science fiction prototype space travel, AI, all these different things, even like mind-altering drugs, all these things that we take for granted in our life right now, they were dreamed up by fiction writers long before they were in our real world. So I'm thinking, what if we looked at them? What if scientists and engineers looked at them now as a way to expand their mind and to go beyond the technological limitations of our world today, and to ask, without any judgment or any ramifications, what if? What if a beam of light could move objects in space? And so climate fiction, which is a category of fiction that I write in, which is novels that engage climate science in some meaningful way, books that encourage conversations and ask questions. They're not preachy, they're not telling you what to think, they're asking what if questions and letting the characters work them out. So climate fiction, it invites you to think beyond our current technological limitations, and it generates conversations, it opens up minds. And this genre of fiction has expanded beyond disaster stories, beyond apocalypse and post-apocalyptic stories, to include stories of utopias and solutions and ways that we might live and adapt and show resilience in the future. They're not just like warning flares. They're not just sirens, or they're showing us a way. They're showing us possible ways that we might live and thrive on a hotter, more volatile, more unjust planet in the future. So I'm going to give you a couple more examples. There's a book called The Water Knife, which I really love, by an author named Paolo Bacigalupi, in which he envisions, and it's a little bit in the future in the southwest of this country. It's a parched, imagine really dry, Arizona, where people live in these climate domes that protect them from the environment to preserve water. It's a book it's called The Water Knife. It's about water policy. And what this book does is it gives us an inside view into really exploring the ethics of water policy, not just feeling, like I need a glass of water, but really understanding the ethics of it. So in this book, we have to look into the eyes of the people who are dealing with this. We have to explore, who gets to live in the climate domes and who is left outside in a perpetual drought. Who gets the water? And who's left aside. And then there's, through fiction we get to explore, ethical considerations, moral considerations before they play out in real life. Like reading this book, I was like, oh, how are we going to distribute water? Where does wealth play into getting water? Should wealth have any impact on who gets water? But I hope not. But I think that people are that's going to play a role for sure when the Colorado River dries up, which Western states are already grappling with this. Then there's another novel, which I love, called Appleseed by Matt Bell, which he envisions armies of robot bees that pollinate crops when we lose our pollinators. It's kind of this amazing, dazzling, but terrifying future that, I don't know, I'm glad we can come up with solutions, but that's scary to me to think that we could be in that future. So these stories test what I like to call last resort technologies for when things go really bad. And fiction functions like a low risk test lab for these ideas about imagining the impossible, imagining a submarine before it's possible, and testing out the ideas in our mind. So if I still haven't convinced you yet, if you're not in on the predictive nature of climate fiction, I'm going to give you one more example, and then I'm going to talk a little bit more about my own writing. So I want to introduce you to the author Octavia Butler. If any of you have read her, she wrote this iconic novel, Parable of the Sower. And this book, now I'm going to say this multiple times because this is really important. This book was written in 1993. And she wrote it about the future. So from 1993, she's writing about the future. In this future, California is burning. There is a drought. Everything is parched. The climate is changing. A new regime has taken over the United States using a political slogan. Does anybody want to guess what the slogan was?
Make America great.
Yep. That was the slogan. She wrote this book in 1993 about the future. But what's crazy is the future she was writing about was set between the years 2024 and 2027. We are living in the future that Octavia Butler wrote about in 1993. I think that we could look at some of these books maybe as blueprints, maybe as guideposts. Not every book, but if we are, scrutinize what we're reading, we might find some really good ideas or warnings that we can, take notice of and take action on. So, climate reports and environmental data tell us what is happening in our world, but stories tell us what it means, why it matters to people, to communities. Fiction writers can take 2 degrees of rising temperature and turn it into flooded bedrooms. They can turn it into unexpected alliances. And these stories matter because they can change people. They can open their minds. Studies show that readers are more likely to engage in climate action after reading a novel that engages climate conversations than they were before reading it. And the reason for that is that the human brain is actually wired to learn and to survive through stories. Stories turned data into moral and existential choices long before we had science, before we even had written language to guide us. We would use stories to share information about, around a campfire before we had books, to tell stories about what berries were safe to eat, how to fend off invaders. Stories protected us and they moved us. Charts and graphs can't do that, at least not in the same way. So dire climate predictions can devastate me, they can terrify me, but I can tell you that they have never made me cry, like losing a single tree did. And I think that if I had started off this talk by saying, hey, when I was a kid, a bunch of trees in my backyard were torn down, and it really stunk. I don't think that would have moved many of you because I'm just sharing a thing that happened. I'm sharing like a data point with you. But I hope that because after walking through my magnificent forest with me, after meeting that one-of-a-kind vine tree and getting to know it and see it and what it mattered to me as a person, I suspect or I hope that you mourned the loss of that forest with me, the loss of that tree. And that is the power of story.